In my last video, I made the first 3 very large, very simple blocks for the Harry Potter Quidditch quilt that I'm making for my dad. Blocks A, B, and C. If you want to make a Quidditch quilt too, you can go back to that video. I have fabric requirements, I have step-by-step instructions, and there is a cutting guide linked in the description of that video. In this video, we're going to jump into the world of applique. And a lot of people will probably be turned off by applique because I think it's too hard. But if you have a good matching thread, even the messiest stitches will blend right in. So if you have time and patience, that's all you really need, you can do this. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to make some templates. And make sure to check out the description of this video because I'm going to include a link to this pattern here and also links to the tools and materials that I'm going to use in this video. There are so many ways to prep your applique pieces, but far and away, my favorite way is freezer paper for so many reasons. But mainly, they're reusable. Freezer paper is super easy for me to get a hold of, and I always get a nice crisp result. So, a lot of pros in my opinion. Okay, so I need to, well, here's some scraps. I could use these if I wanted to just make a couple at a time. That would fit just fine right there. And this one would work too. But instead, I'm going to pull out roughly the length of this paper. And instead of using the serrated edge on here, like I did last time, I'm going to be a little neater and use a rotary cutter, but not a fresh blade. So this rotary cutter exclusively has old blades, so if I wear this one out, it goes here, and then this is just for cutting paper. So I'll go ahead and go as straight as possible, just like that. Now I'm going to take this piece and fold it in half. So I folded a nice crease there so I can open it back up and use my rotary cutter to cut along that line. Whoops! And don't cut through the template. So pretty rough like that. So now I'm going to take this mess here and iron these 2 pieces together. So on my ironing board, I'm going to lay the first piece down with the shiny side down. And then I'll take my second piece and lay that shiny side down on top of this piece. So I'll have a double layer of freezer paper. I should also mention, while I'm actually thinking about it, this box needs to print at 1 inch by 1 inch. So if you are having problems with your printer and this isn't coming out 1 inch by 1 inch, you need to manipulate some settings maybe and make sure that that comes out the correct size so you don't have anything off later on if you're using this pattern. Okay, here are my 2 pieces. I've sort of tried to get the straight edge here lined up and straightish edge there, and then here's my wonky side. And I'm just going to run my iron over it until it sticks together. And you want to make sure your iron is nice and hot, or else it's not going to fuse quite as well as you hope. So once you think you're done, you would put your iron to the side, let this cool down for a minute or 2, and then test the edges to see how well they are adhered. I can already tell, I'm just using my fingernail, that they're pretty stuck together around these edges. And then I can just peel it up off of my ironing board. Okay, so you might have noticed that I wrote make 33 here, and that means I'm going to make 33 applique pieces, not 33 templates, because I'm going to use these over and over again. Now I'm going to use my trusty Elmer's stick glue. I'm going to flip this over and apply this pretty thickly. You don't have to be super thick about it. Oh, it looks like I need a new glue stick. You don't have to be super thick on it if you don't want to. It just means that this top layer is going to fall off eventually, which is fine. You only need this layer really for the first step when you're cutting out your pieces. When you're finished gluing, you'll simply stick this down onto the matte side of the freezer paper, not the shiny side, the matte side. And I try to give it a real good, I don't know, burnishing to make sure it makes good contact with that paper. And I like to leave it to dry naturally, but you could always use your iron to heat set it if you want. Just personal preference here. See, this part keeps coming up, so I'm going to add a little bit more glue, even though I really don't need to. But just because it's annoying me. There we go. So now I'm going to set this aside to dry. So from here, I just need to cut out the pieces on these lines, and it does roll quite a bit when it dries, but it's no big deal because once you iron it down to your fabric, it's going to flatten out again. So I'm going to use my paper rotary cutter to just sort of rough cut this out first. And then I'll get my paper scissors to cut the fine details. I'm going to be using this navy fabric for my applique shapes, and I have almost, I think a little over half a yard left. So, and I have to make 33 shapes. So I'm optimistic that I'm going to have enough. So when I'm placing my shapes, I need to be aware of my seam allowance. So I want at least a 1/4 inch that can fold over my shape. So I'm going to get my little square up ruler. It's very handy here, and I'm going to make sure that I have a 1/4 inch. Let's go this way. At least a 1/4 inch from the edge of the fabric, and also from the selvage. So this should work. And I like to be a little generous, so I'll scooch it over a little bit, and then I'll iron that down. I just turned on my iron, so it might not be hot enough. It's working. Okay, so the space in between two shapes needs to be at least 1/2 inch. And I usually am more of like a 3/4 inch here. So I'll do that. Ooh, it's hot. The fabric is hot. Then I'll iron that one down. And I'll keep going this way until I have all 9 shapes ironed down. So it looks like I can comfortably fit 6 of these badge shapes across the width of my fabric. And I would almost be tempted to make another set of templates just so I could complete 3 rows at a time. But I'm not going to, so I'll stick with this. I'm going to take this to my cutting mat, and I'll cut at least a 1/4 inch up above the shape, and then I'll cut in between each shape, and I'll show you how I'm going to turn these edges. And if you saw how I made my Howl's Moving Castle quilt, you'll probably know where I'm going to go with this. Here are my applique pieces. I rough cut out the bottoms, trying to be generous and trying to be as neat as possible, except sometimes it wasn't possible, so here we go. I also have my Faultless spray starch, an old makeup brush that I never actually used for makeup, and a dull seam ripper that I use as sort of a stiletto. And there is actually a kit with really good tools that will do the same thing, and you don't have to improvise with junk around your house, and I'm going to link that in the description of this video if you're interested. Anyway, I'm going to take my spray starch, give it a good shake, really good shake, and then I'm going to spray right into my cup. It's pretty bubbly, but the bubbles will go down. So after the bubbles have gone down, you basically just have that liquid starch to work with. And I'm going to get my brush very, very wet, and I'm going to run it down the side of my applique. And you can go too heavy with this and make your template wet, and it like loses its shape really easily. So be careful with that. So I'm going to use, I mostly use the seam ripper / stiletto to hold the piece still so it doesn't slide all around. And then I use the edge, this edge here of my iron, to sort of scoop up the fabric and push it over the side of my template. If the template is still sticking up like this, it means it's not all the way dry yet. Give it a little bit more heat. Then when it is hugging the paper, you can see when it has really formed well against the edge, then you move on to the next section. And this curve is so very slight, you don't have to do any clipping or anything. It'll work right in without any extra prep. So I'm just going to wet it down like the straight side. Hold it down with the stiletto and use my iron to scoop up the fabric. And I'm going to try to use my stiletto right here in this point to try to keep it nice and sharp. But if you lose it, you lose it, you know? If at any point you feel like it isn't as perfect as it should be, just think about what Molly makes, and it's made with love. It's not perfect, but Molly Weasley makes things with love. So there's that first curve. Maybe you could see it better from here. Okay, we're going to just keep doing that along these edges. The shape I'm going to show you in the next video is maybe a little bit more challenging just because you have to deal with a little bit of bulk at some points. So, but this is a good practice for the technique because it's really one of the more simple shapes you could start with. So it's hard to show you, but right here, it's not laying down all the way, and that's partly because of the bulk. So what I could do is just be happy with it, or I could add a little bit more starch right there. Just dab it right there and run it over with the iron again. And now you can see it's laying flat. So there is my very first shape. Here's what it looks like from the back. Here's what it looks like from the front. So that's one down, 32 more to go. Hopefully you're not in a heat wave like I am. You might have noticed this little bit of fabric that's overlapping here. You could fix that if you wanted, or you can just tuck it under when you're sewing it down. Just tuck it under and you'll never see it. So I'm going to leave it how it is right now and fix it in situ, you might say. So I'm going to keep going. I'm probably going to turn on some YouTube and try not to melt. Right now I just have a fan pointed at my feet and it's not cutting it. So I'm going to turn on my ceiling fan, which I don't usually turn on during videos because it rattles and I don't want to drive anyone insane. So I'll see you when I have all 32 of these shield shapes done. Here are the first 6 done. A little fuzzy. And I forgot to tell you how you reuse these templates. So I'll just take this one. And what I do is I just peel up one side, which is pretty stiff from the starch, and then I just peel the template out, which has the applique piece looking a little rough around the edges. So what I do after I peel out the template is I just put it down right side up and I just hit it with my iron again, just to reinforce those creases so my shape doesn't become all wonky and hard to work with, and it smooths right back down again. For the central block of this quilt, I gave my dad 2 options. So first, a raven for Ravenclaw, or the second, an R for Ravenclaw. And I was leaning pretty heavily towards the raven, and I thought that's what my dad was going to choose too. To my surprise, he chose the R. I think mainly, actually, because it matches the first initial of his name and has less to do with Ravenclaw, but, you know, whatever. So I'm going to make an applique shape with this fabric, and I'm going to put it on a background of that marine blue that I have been using. Here is my template. 4 pages. It's a very big R. I'm going to include the template in the description of this video, and I'm also going to do an H for Hufflepuff, a G for Gryffindor, and an S for Slytherin. The way you put this together is you go 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're wondering if your template has printed correctly, check the 1-inch squares. Each page has that. So you want each of those squares to print out at 1 inch by 1 inch. To tape these together, I'm going to be using heat-safe tape again, so I can iron over it safely. And I'm also going to, every time one of the pages connects to the other, I'm going to cut one side of this extra seam allowance so that I can overlap that and match up more accurately on the other piece. So if you cut both sides of the excess, then you have to sort of butt them up and hope they don't shift or you haven't cut something funny, and then tape them together. It's just easier this way. Believe me, trust me. So in this case, I would cut along this line. I'm going to match up the lines all the way. So I'm going to match up these lines here along with all of the lines that intersect throughout the template. And I can't really see that far away because of the camera in my face. And I'm going to make sure to tape inside the shape. I'm not going to just focus on the places that are going to be cut off. I need to tape the shape together, because when this cuts out, if I've only taped here, I'm going to lose that. So after I finished this edge, I've taped it all down, I would cut off the excess there. I would also have taped the top portion together, and then I would overlap this piece onto this piece and tape again. I'm just going to skip ahead to the final product so you can see what I mean. This is what your template should look like once it's all taped up, a nice legible R, except I realized I forgot something. I always forget it too. For applique, I need to have mirrored this image, so the R should have been backwards. So I'm going to scrap this, flip my template, print it all out, and tape it all up all over again. But essentially it's the same process as making these little shield shapes. I'm going to glue it down to the freezer paper, cut out the freezer paper shape, and then fuse that sticky side of the freezer paper to your fabric. There is one exception though. On your fabric, after you've cut out the seam allowance, so it's looking something like this, except neater. Every time you come to one of these inner corners, you're going to cut your fabric, not past your shape line, just inside that shape line. So you'll cut a little angle so that those pieces can fold under neatly. Now that my template is all cut out, I can stick it down to my fabric. Specifically, I'm going to stick it to this navy square that I cut out earlier. It's 20 by 20. I cut it out in the last video. Especially for this, I didn't know exactly how big I was going to make it. So 20 by 20, and I'm going to have some left over. So I'm not going to center it. I'm going to scoot it down towards the edges. If I get my seam allowances correct at this point, it's just a little bit less cutting that I have to do after the piece has been stuck down. Plus I have some leftover, a lot left over. And this is why I use heat safe tape, because I have to iron right over it a lot to get it to stick down. And if I had used just plain Scotch tape, that would melt and get all on my iron. It would just be an absolute mess. And again, I'm going to leave a link to this tape in the description of this video. Highly recommend, haven't had a problem yet. Here's the back. It is not looking super neat, but it's going to be fine. And then here is the front. It looks a lot better than the back. Now that all of my shapes are prepped, they need to go somewhere. So I'm going to bring in these big marine squares. They're 20.5 by 20.5 inches. And for the R, it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to center it on that block. So that one's easy enough. But when it comes to my shields, I want to be as neat as I can. I know it's not going to come out perfect no matter what I do, but I want to try to be neat at least. And if I eyeball this, I'm going to be doing rows. If I eyeball this, I know I'm going to get off. And I know that it's going to be uneven and maybe even slant up or down. So I've made sort of a rudimentary guide here. So I'm going to fold my big square in half to get the center line so I can match up the center line. And then on the corners here, I'm using an X-Acto knife to just cut there, fold back the corner, cut here, fold back the corner, and cut here and fold back the corner. And then my plan is, let me move some stuff around real quick. I'm going to line up the middle and the edge. And I'm going to cut all the rest of the corners. And then I'm going to mark the corners. Here, there was a test piece. Use my marking pencil and mark the corners, and then that down there too. And then I can place my pieces within those marks, like so. And I think it's not going to be perfect, like I said, but I think it'll help me keep on track with what I'm doing. I can't believe I almost forgot to tell you how I'm going to be attaching them. So first of all, Elmer's washable school glue. Precision tip, absolute must. I love mine. For the shields, either I can leave dots of glue where I've marked in 3 spots, or what I'm actually going to do is leave dots in the seam allowance of each of my applique shapes. I'm not going to do whole lines. I'm going to do sporadic dots. And when I am placing the dots, I want to make sure that I'm not putting them, oh, I need to clean my tip, I think. I'm going to make sure that I'm not putting them close to the edge here where I want to sew. I'm going to put them actually as far into the seam allowance as possible so the glue dots don't get in the way. As much as I love these precision tips, they are persnickety sometimes. I do have to clean them quite often. A lot of people are very intimidated by applique because it's hand sewing and they're just like, it's weird, it's hard, I don't want to even try it. But I've got to say, the applique stitch is like the simplest stitch you can do. You'll need a couple things. I like to use these size 5 millimeters needles, but it's really up to your own comfort what you want to use. You basically want something that's fine and your thread will fit through the eye of the needle easily. And then another really good thing to have is a thimble, so you don't get your finger all sore and end up dreading the process. So let's start by using a contrasting thread just so you can see what I'm doing, and then I'll show you what it looks like with a matching thread. People are going to tell you all sorts of things about the length you need, and they'll say shorter is better and longer is better. I would say start short and work your way up until you find the length that you like to use. Then to make a knot, oh wow, I cut this really long actually. I'm going to cut that down. That's too long. To make your knot at the end, you're going to make an X with your thread and your needle. Hold that down, and then I'm going to wrap 1, 2, 3, 4. And the number of wraps that you do for each thread is going to change based on your thickness. But I found with this size or width of the thickness of thread, I like 4 wraps. And then I'm going to start from the back. So I'm going to aim with my needle for the tip of this applique shape. It might take a couple tries to get there. Oh, and I forgot my thimble. Okay, so I keep it on my middle finger for this, and I'll use it to push the needle through. So I'm going to pull until there's resistance. And then the key that I have found to make this invisible is that you're going to go underneath. Here, bring this a little closer. Going to put your needle a little bit underneath the shape. And then you're going to go forwards and come up through the shape. And it's going to be just at the edge. Okay, push that through. Your next stitch is going to go right beside where you came out, but just a tiny bit under the shape. Okay. Pull that through. It's looking a little messy, but doable. And I usually actually do sort of small stitches, but I'm trying to hurry along here. So that'll be another preference you'll probably build up is the width that you like to sew each stitch, the width apart. And you just keep going like that. And I think I'm pretty slow at this. You might be much faster. But you can see the stitch is very simple. You come out through the shape and you go back down just a little bit below the shape, okay? And you can see it's not perfectly even. I'm aiming for good enough, not perfect. So I try to get right to the corners as close as I can. Another thing to consider is the direction that you're going to be sewing. So I'm right-handed. I like to go from right to left. Or I like to go down up. So that's a matter of your own personal opinion. And I also, when I'm bringing the needle up, you'll see that I'm sort of bending my fabric to help find the place that I want the needle to come out. So I'm not going straight out like this. I'm not going under and then nothing is happening with my left hand. I'm actually folding and pushing through. When you get to the end, you might have this folded piece of fabric sticking out. For instance, let's see. So you can see that this one has just a little piece sticking out. When you get to that point, you would just use your needle to kind of grab it with the point and push it under so it's out of the way, and then you can continue sewing. So as you can see, super, super, super simple stitch, but it looks really messy, right? You can see everywhere that I got a little messy or off, or I didn't catch it quite right, or it's twisted, or whatever. The key is matching thread, because this side down here is already sewn, but I used matching thread, and you can't see it unless the light hits it just right to get the sheen of the thread. So this is what the back looks like. It is not perfect. It is a little wonky here and there, but because it matches, it's invisible. So that is absolutely the one big secret to applique. You want to match your thread to the shape that is on top of the fabric. You're not matching to your background, match to your shape. Okay, so I have a nice knot. I pull it tight, and then I can get my snips and cut. Okay, and you are not done until you check the back, because sometimes if with your matching thread you can't tell where you've been before, so always double check your back to make sure you haven't missed a spot. I just want to reiterate here, the only two things you need are patience and matching thread, and it is just so simple. You can sit in front of the TV, you can listen to an audiobook, you can talk with friends, you can take it in the car, as long as you're not going somewhere too bumpy, actually. But it's super duper easy. It's really great for summer because you don't have a whole lot of heat laying on your lap. You just have it in your hand. And a lot of people say it is so therapeutic to have these sort of slow projects. Really good for your mental health and to just sort of de-stress. So don't let it intimidate you. Go ahead, make a little sample and try it out and see how you feel about it. And you might just find that it is very addicting. Here's a quick look at my shield block. And you can see it's very crinkly because I have to sometimes bunch it up to get to where I'm sewing. But look how even messier it looks up here. Look at all of these threads. So what's happening here is that I started and I did all of the sides like this, all the way down, and I left a thread and I didn't cut or knot. And then I came through after I'd finished all the way down and I sewed all of these sides all the way down. And then now I'm finishing up by sewing up the tops of each of the shapes. And the reason I did this is, one, I like to thread several needles at once. I don't like to stop at each shape. And two, it can be really frustrating so if you're working on just one shape, to sew this side and then turn it and then sew this side and then turn it again, and it just sort of gets messy fast, in my opinion. It's very annoying. So I like to do it a little bit at a time, make some progress. It does get messy with the threads, sure, but if you keep them managed and out of the way, it's not a big deal. The one tip I have for you if you're going to do this is to make sure that your shapes are glued down really well and they won't get dislodged when you have to crumple them up to get to these shapes, okay? To get to these sides. Honestly, my biggest pet peeve about applique is managing the bigger pieces and how crinkly and messy it gets, but it's pretty simple to just press it out. For example, this R down here, it was much, much, much messier than it is now, but I gave it a nice press. It's manageable, and it's ready to go into the finished quilt top. Okay, so we've got 4 blocks completely finished, one that is almost entirely finished, except for some sewing and trimming off the excess on the edges. And then in the next video, in part 3, I'm going to show you how I'm going to finish the background blocks, and then I'm going to put it all together, and I'm even going to show you my inspiration pictures so you can tell me if I got close, or I missed a detail, or you can just tell me whatever you think about it. And after that, I think there's just one more video. I'm not going to show you quilting it because I am not really good at deciding on quilting patterns and things. But I want to show you the really weird thing that my dad requests on every quilt that I've made him so far. Thanks for spending time with me today, quilters. If you want to support this channel and help me buy supplies and materials for future videos, please visit my Buy Me a Coffee page linked in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss upcoming videos. And I'll see you again real soon. Bye!